So can I say a big welcome to all of you? Thank you for coming out from lots of places around the state. My name's Adam Davis. I'm with Oregon Humanities. Welcome to Consider This on the theme of fear and belonging. It's sort of what led us to Father Greg Boyle. Along with, I just want to say, another way we got here, and maybe this will help explain a little bit. I was talking with a friend here, Robin Steely, and mentioned the theme of fear and belonging, and she paused and said, I think there's someone that might be good to talk to. I then checked in with colleagues about it, and they were very enthusiastic, and then went back to Robin, who went to Paul Lipscomb. And so I want to say thanks to Robin and Paul for helping bring you here. So I want to tell you a couple other things to orient you, and then we're going to get into talking. And I guess part of orienting you is we're in the welcome and thank you part of the program. We're quickly going to go to some thanks to organizations and people that made this possible. Then I want to ask them some questions that will help you get oriented to the room we're in. Then we're going to jump in. We're going to talk for a bit up here, and then we'll have time for questions from the microphone over there. And those will be with the help of my colleague, Roselle Medina at Oregon Humanities, who a week from now will be facilitating a follow-up conversation online. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up. For those people that are watching online, you see the link on screen, and if you're here in person, you can just check in out front with anyone from Oregon Humanities. A couple thank yous. The National Endowment for the Humanities, United We Stand, Connecting Through Culture Initiative, the Oregon Cultural Trust, the Susan Hammer Fund at the Oregon Community Foundation, the Standard, Tonkin Torp, and especially Anna Sortune. And Anna, I hear your mother's here. Welcome. That's great. And the City of Portland's We Are Better Together program. I also want to say thanks to so many of you here and online who do so much to support Oregon Humanities and so much in your communities. Thank you for all of that. Let's do that for a minute. All right, couple questions. Again, this is mostly to help you get oriented to the room. If this is your first Oregon Humanities Consider This, could you make a little noise? If you're a returner, could you make a little noise? All right. It seems that the rookies have it. So welcome to all of you. Second question, again, answer please with noise. If you've got a crew, you just feel like you got some people that's a crew that it's important you to have in the world, could you make a little noise? If you would like the edges of that crew to be a little further out, that crew to be a little bigger, could you make a little noise? All right, last question, and deliberately more complicated to answer. If, for you, there's a hard line between justice and tenderness, could you make a little noise? Yeah, so that was meant to be less of a applause line, but that's interesting. I want to say one last welcome and then turn to you, Father Greg. And I want to say a welcome especially to three groups that are here. And so Enrique Batista up from Woodburn with the Taking Accountability group. The Volunteers of America Men's Residential Group. And I think the Latino Network is over here. A big thank you. All right. Thank you all for being here. I have talked far too long. When I mentioned Paul before, I noticed that the dedication of the whole language, your book, The Whole Language, is to Paul and one other person and the Tuesday Night Gang. So I wanted to ask you, for starters, about that word gang. What's a gang?
Well, it's a privilege to be with all of you. Well, in that context, the Tuesday night gang was a specific group during COVID. We would meet at 5 o'clock. I think it was once a week, which seems inconceivable now, but and it was homies from all. And so there was a lot of my what I would call my dearly deporteds. So homies who had gone to prison, and although they had come in their mother's arms to Los Angeles from, Honduras or Mexico or someplace, and then Salvador. And then after doing a stint in prison, no matter how long the stint was, they were deported. So there were all these guys that we knew, and so we would just meet every Tuesday and then just discuss. Usually it was a scripture passage or something, but it would always go off into some other viaje, But a gang is really, somehow you want to find a tribe that ends all tribalism, and you want to somehow nurture a community, a place of kinship such that God might recognize it and foster a place of cherished belonging. So, belonging gone wrong is, I don't know if you know the poet Padre Otama, who talks about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and he says it's really about belonging gone wrong. And when I privileged to know him, and we were talking, and I said, yeah, that's the same thing with gangs, really. It's belonging gone wrong. And so how do you kind of create and nurture into being this kind of, sense of community that's nurturing and cherishing and leads people to flourishing joy? So that's, a gang.
How did you start thinking about not only gangs but people who identify as having been in them? Like, was that a change in you to come to gangs?
Yeah, it was never a decision I made. I was pastor of the poorest parish in L.A., and it was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens, Aliso Village. It had the largest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So we had 8 gangs at war with each other. So it wasn't like a decision I made. I started to bury kids in 1988, killed because of gang violence. And 2 months ago, I buried my 261st. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members, so I get asked. So it was always an evolution. It was never, I think like up here where I go, gangs is kind of an issue. I'd like to kind of wrap my arms around it. It was never that. Mm-hmm. It was, these are people in my parish. And in those days, gangs were kind of more indigenous in as much as they actually lived in the neighborhoods that they claimed. So this is my barrio because I live here. My mom lives here. And then I would say that's mainly not at all true now, in Los Angeles anyway, that it's kind of a commuter experience. And so where people will, this is my neighborhood, And, and when I'm in the projects and I see homies there, and what are you doing here? Well, this is my barrio. And I go, you've never lived a minute of your life in this neighborhood. But that wasn't true back then, So, and I saw them as parishioners not because they came to church, but because they lived within the geographic, area that was technically my parish. So.
Mm-hmm. And that number that you cited a minute ago is one clear measure of belonging gone wrong.
Yeah, I think so, And people would kind of go, why do you keep track? I started to do it. It happened at a very particular historic moment where I started to count, and it became clear, like at one point I buried 8 kids in a 3-week period in my parish. And I remember there was a woman, a graphic artist named Karen Toshima, who was killed in Westwood, which is near UCLA, where people would go for dinner and movies. And she got caught in some gang crossfire. Well, my gosh, the next day, detectives were taken from all these other cases, and they were applied to this case. More police were pumped into, the Westwood area. And a huge reward was offered for information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of the person who did this. And that was at a time when I was burying 8 kids in a 3-week period. And then it became clear to me that one life lost in Westwood was worth more than 8 lives lost in Boyle Heights. So then I started to keep track. This is the 30th kid I've buried. This is the 150th kid. So I always have, and I have a little book that I use, like at a graveside thing, and in the back pages are just filled with all the names. And so that mattered, that no lives are worth less than other lives. And so how do you stand against forgetting that we belong to each other, and that there are no exceptions to that?
So I want to ask you a little bit about belonging gone right. And in a way, maybe one way to get there is, I told you the name of this series is Fear and Belonging. And the more I read your books and listened to you online, the more I got worried, because I was like, he's pretty good at belonging. I'm a little worried about the fear part.
Well, I think that fear is sort of indicates something. And, I was talking to a friend who works with the unhoused in Virginia, and she's been doing this for many years. And she said, homeless people don't become homeless because they run out of money. They become homeless because they run out of relationships. And so that's kind of the anchor of fear, that it indicates that there's kind of a lack of relational wholeness, and that people kind of fall into fear when they're not connected. So it's a kind of a dissociative cave, And what coaxes people out of that cave is, I would say, is cherishing love. And so, I always, people always ask me why I joined the Jesuits, and I used to always give the same answer. I would say, well, because, they taught me, and I found them to be hilarious and prophetic. And that was a combo burger that made me want to say, yeah, I'll have what they're having. But now, 50 years later, I connect it to kind of discipleship, which is the mark of authenticity. There is joy and fearlessness. And so fearlessness is kind of this diving into connection with people and knowing that separation is an illusion, and that we're all kind of joined at the hip if we can just kind of step aside from how delusional it is to think that there is an us and a them. So I don't really spend that much time with fear, actually, because I think it's really about fearlessness that's anchored in people inhabiting their own dignity and nobility. So, I always listen to, like we have 8 tours a day at our headquarters in Los Angeles, in Chinatown. And, and I always ear hustle, usually when I'm going to the restroom and I hear I never give the tours, but the homies are giving the tours. And I remember a homegirl said, here at Homeboy, we laugh from the stomach, which everybody understands, at least at Homeboy we understand, because it's about joy. If there's nothing kind of on the surface about it. And then the other day I heard a homie say, here at Homeboy, they always begin the sentence with, here at Homeboy, if you reach out a hand, 1 million hands come back at you. And then the third one, again, I'm a geezer, so I make a lot of trips to the restroom. And so I ear hustle, and this guy said, here at Homeboy, if you're going through it, if you're really struggling with something, they don't tell you go into that room and work it out. They're in the room with you, which I thought was beautiful, So it's all about, you keep fear at bay if you're connected to people. And so relational wholeness is the key. The Buddhists say, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." So homies, especially nowadays, in the state of California anyway, a lot of folks who never thought they'd ever come home from prison have been released because of a lot of changes in laws. And so they will say things like, I'm used to being watched, but I'm not used to being seen. So you want people to be truly greeted, and people brighten when you walk through the door because they know what it means to have chosen to do so. And so you create a place that's safe where people can be seen, and then they can be cherished. And so if it's true that a traumatized person is likely to cause trauma, it has to be equally true that a cherished person is going to be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So it dispels fear for sure, but it replaces it with the same authenticity that we might say in other circles about discipleship: joy and fearlessness. Because the fearlessness is really about a muscular hope and a sturdy kind of resilience where people can leave us after 18 months and the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled.
Can I ask you concretely, what does truly greeting someone look like?
Truly greeting? Yeah, I don't know what it is. Kinship and kindness and tenderness is kind of atmospheric at Homeboy. People always talk about the secret sauce. A homie was trying to explain to somebody what happens there, and he goes, I don't know what it is, but it's like an aroma. But if you go there, and I see people wearing Homeboy swag, so maybe you've actually been there, and I don't know how to explain it. People walk in the door. And our program is not for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. So you do have to walk through the door. I mean, there's kind of no way around that. But you watch. I had my office when we moved there in 2008. I kind of wanted to be able to see whoever walks through those front doors. And it comes in handy because I'll see a gang member who I don't know, but I can see he's like this. He's looking around. Who's here? Am I safe? And you make eye contact and you go, hey, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Somehow you're able, everybody does that. Everybody is giving a dose of holding the mirror up and returning people to themselves. I mean, we're allergic to that notion of hold the bar up and ask people to measure up. You just want to tell people the truth, that they're exactly right. and that they couldn't be one bit better. Once people know that truth, they become that truth, they inhabit that truth. But that's the intentionality, is to brighten, choose to brighten, which is how, that's where the joy is.
The aroma. The aroma seems important, and I want to stay there a little more, even if there's something beautiful about understanding it as kind of the climate or the fabric. But then you talked about eye contact and how important it was for you to not only see the people coming in, but probably for them to know that you're seeing each other.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to ask more about that aroma. I'm not asking for a recipe, but on the way to a recipe, what else is happening there that feels like it contributes to it being such a transformed and unique space?
Well, I was at the LA Times Festival of Books, and I was on a panel with a rabbi and a columnist from the LA Times. And I don't know, we were talking about whatever the heck we were talking about. It was a big auditorium, and at one point I said, there are kind of two unwavering principles that we embrace at Homeboy. And one is everybody's unshakably good. There are no exceptions. And two, we belong to each other. No exceptions. And then I said, now, do I believe that all our vexing, complex social dilemma would just disappear if we embrace those two principles? Yes, I do. But I think your laughter was different than theirs. They roared with laughter, and I was kind of startled by it. And then when it subsided, I said, yes, I do. And yes, I do. And I think that's kind of the principle there, because keep in mind, it's black, brown, Asian, everybody is working with multiple enemies. And so there we are all together. And it's more home than home. A homie said to me the other day, the part I love the most about Homeboy? I said, what? The home part. I said, well, yeah, that's the aroma, Although I was thinking lately, the aroma, I had a homie in my office the other day, and oh my God, he had been hotboxing it or something. And I looked at him, and he hugged me, and I said, wow, if they drug test me right now, I may not pass just because I've been in your vicinity. But yeah, so the aroma is tenderness, and it's a kind of an insistence that love, can stay in the ether and in your head, and maybe it falls into your heart, and with any luck, it makes its way to your feet. But tenderness is connective tissue, and then, so lately I've been saying cherishing more than, like my publisher, because I'm writing a book, and so I was calling it cherished belonging. And he goes, no, cherished is my editor. Yeah, it's just, it's too squishy. And how about just belonging? So then I went to Amazon and I looked it up and punched in belonging. There, just first page, there are 36 titles called belonging. And I went, no, because cherishing is love fully engaged, and cherishing is tenderness in action, and cherishing is love with its sleeves rolled up. So, no, I want it to be cherished belonging. So he relented. But I think that's kind of important, because it's a way of being, and a way of seeing people, and a way of kind of zeroing in on some kind of precious, soulful sense of this person who's standing right in front of you. So, in God talk, you would kind of see, Isaiah having God say, "You are precious in my eyes and I love you." And that's the truth of who you are. And then equally, we meet people and you see the precious, soulful core of a person. And then it doesn't matter. Behavior doesn't matter. Performance doesn't matter. That's who you are. And this is a population who walks through our doors feeling that they are, in fact, everything that's wrong with them. And so how do you dispel that? How do you get to a place where a homie finished his 18 months the other day, Adrian, and and he hugged me and he thanked me and he was leaving us after 18 months. And I said, "You're the best." And he looked at me and he goes, "I'm starting to believe it." And that's kind of what you hope for. Healing ends in the graveyard, but there is a kind of an essential foundational healing that we kind of embrace at Homeboy. Before we never had that. People stayed there, forever, because it was more home than home, and they didn't want to leave. But we couldn't bring in more people. It wasn't fiscally very sound. So people had to leave, and we wanted to encourage them. What's your imagination saying? Well, I'd like to do that. Okay, let's train you to do that. So that they would leave, and so that you could allow more people to come in. But then we had to decide, a year is too short, 2 years was too long. So we arrived at 18 months, and then after the fact, we kind of discovered that 18 months is the amount of time for an infant to attach to the caregiver. And so we kind of, this is about attachment repair, that everyone who walks through our door comes with a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening. And you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so 18 months kind of does it. It's essential, it's foundational. It's not once and for all, and it doesn't end at 18 months. But that's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm. I hope this question makes sense, and it's a question related to the appreciative sounds that some of you are making in response to some of your comments about wholeness and about seeing each other. And also the word remember you used earlier. And I'm thinking about how when you say this and when I read it from you, I go, yeah, absolutely. And I make the same sound, that sort of affirmative sound that feels really good. But then sometimes when I'm going through my day, it's very hard to be tender towards anyone, let alone someone who's pissed me off for some reason or done something that I think is terrible. So I want to ask about that.
Yeah, well, I think that, there's a misconception, and unfortunately it happens a lot in kind of Christian circles where they go, a homie wrote me and he said a pastor was going to show a movie, and he wrote him and he said, "Can you please bring some people who are unsaved?" And so that's kind of the notion. There's a kind of a once and for allness to how we see things, even in our own daily practice. So you may be connected in the morning, like your own rendezvous, and whatever that means, where you breathe in and you breathe out and you prepare for your day, whether that's in some kind of spiritual thing or just kind of calming yourself down. And then you go, yeah, I'm good to go. And then you encounter, your day and people who are annoying you. So it's like a lot of the homies are in recovery, and so they'll say one day at a time, and I'll go, no, that's way too long, That it should be with every breath you take, that you choose to cherish with every breath you take. I was in New York recently, and I like to go on my little morning walk, and there were two construction workers who were quite loud. One was, in any case, and very New York, and he was trying to convince the other guy of this coffee that he liked. And it was encouraging the other guy with some force. This is the coffee he should drink. And he says, freshly grounded Turkish coffee. And so I'm walking past in case anybody in earshot might have missed this. Freshly, he says it again, grounded Turkish coffee. And I walked past and I went, there it is. It's my mantra for the day, and it's actually been for a while. And the mantra is freshly grounded, because you think that you are grounded once and for all. You think that you are awakened once and for all. But the practice, what gets habituated in your own prayer, in your own meditation, in your own stillness, is to be freshly grounded. So I was at the office Monday, and, I parked my car and I'm walking, and we have 500 gang members who work there. And they're all, before the day begins, they're all out in front, And so I brace myself, because you want to be attentive to every single one, and they're always hugging you, and you don't want to leave anybody out. And my mantra, walking from my car to our headquarters, was freshly grounded, But I think that's where those things come, because then there's a habituated sensitivity to how you are present to people. And it also dispels a notion of like burnout. I kind of don't believe in burnout, and I had somebody who wrote a book on self-care, and she sent it to me, and please blurb it, and I did, but I kind of don't believe in it, because like our senior staff, we have about 150 senior staff. 70% of them are homies and homegirls, who went through the program. Now they run the place. But, they would come to me and they'd go, oh my God, I don't know. I think I might need 2 months off or something, because I guess, I'm just too compassionate. And they go, yeah. Here's what I think's happened. I think you've allowed it to become about you, and it can't be about you. And so when it's about you, it's going to be about fixing, saving, rescuing. Can't be. But it's like in Houston many years ago, I gave a talk afterwards. I ran into a homie all tatted down. Now he is working with gang members. And he kind of pleaded with me, and he said, how do you reach them? And I found myself saying, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you receive who they are? Can you allow your heart to be altered by them? Because that's a shift that turns stuff on its head, it seems to me. Then that is eternally replenishing. And then it's a part of your practice to be freshly grounded, to receive people. Today I'm going to be reached by so many people, as opposed to the depleting thing that tries to fix people, rescue people, save people. So that's where the joy is, You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And that feels passive or whatever it might feel like, but that's the terrain where in an exquisitely mutual way, people are able to inhabit their own dignity and nobility. And of course, so nobody burns out in that, because you can't wait to park your car and walk the 3 blocks and be freshly grounded to be loving and attentive to people. Cherishing people is not hard. Remembering to cherish people is really difficult. And so that's why the practice is so, essential.
It's interesting when you were talking about freshly grounded Turkish coffee. Coffee in the New York, with a New York sound. I was hearing it in a Chicago sound, which is where I'm from. And I was also thinking about previous jobs I had were working with young people involved in the juvenile justice system. And I was thinking, actually, they would hear freshly grounded and think of it very differently. Like they'd all been freshly grounded for 6 months, and they were going to be freshly grounded for another 6 months. And so, and I'm not saying that for the pun, I'm saying that because I think that's why I'm asking a little bit about the aroma, and I'm thinking a little bit about the 18 months. You have people with a deep experience. I mean, we were talking to Enrique, you were talking with Enrique backstage, who essentially had been grounded for 21 years. I hope it's okay to say that, Enrique. And then to shift, to think about freshly grounded in the way you're talking about, feels like this is big transformative stuff, and 18 months is a short period of time. How to try to work on that shift?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know. I mean, you want to be able to somehow find the ground of your being. You want to find the thing that nobody can take from you. And that's the core, the center. I remember I was in Portland when I found out that this homie named Moreno was killed. And the kid who was with him when he was killed was blowing up my cell phone, and he was just screaming and crying and saying they just killed Moreno. And if any of you have read a book called Tattoos on the Heart, there's a kid in there who never got excited about anything, and I remember I would call him in the projects and I'd say, "Hey, what are you doing?" He goes, "Just right here, blasing it." Now, as an English major, I didn't know you could actually do that to that word, but he came from just a horrible, torturous childhood and parenting. And anyway, he went to probation camps, juvenile hall, and he ended up going to a suitable placement. And he called me and he said, "Hey, kidnap me." And he was in Orange County in a placement, and so he needed me to get him close because he was in school for the very first time. He had been like a elementary school dropout, so now he was in school. So I talked to the people at this group home, and so I went and picked him up on a Saturday. We went to the mall to go get clothes, So, I was saying, "Well, how's school?" And he was blasing it, and there must be subjects you like, What about English? Hate it. How about history? Can't stand it. What about math? The worst. There must be something you like. Do you have a science? Oh, my biology, that's the bomb right there. And he got so out of body excited. And he said, "Check this out. On Monday, we're digesting a frog." And I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. And I said, "Actually, it's dissecting a frog." And he goes, "Whatever. Monday we're fucking with a frog." Well, his brother 6 months before he was killed, before Moreno was killed, had also been killed. And I remember he came back to the office finally after I had done the funeral, and a week had passed probably. And so I called him into my office just to see how you doing. And he said, death is a punk. And I've always loved that because I always thought, yeah, that's it. Because the idea is find the thing that nobody can touch, that no bullet can pierce. Yeah, death is a punk. And so I was in Portland when I found out that Moreno had been killed. And I flew home, and I remember we have morning meeting, and people were sobbing because he was so beloved. One of the reasons was who he was, but also because he was undocumented. He was also one of those kids who had come to the United States in his mother's arms. I spoke better Spanish than he did. And so he couldn't really leave. He was kind of with us for a long time, so he was so beloved. But I remember telling the gathered who were sobbing, I told them that Moreno said when his brother was killed, death is a punk. So everybody needs to compile the fates, the list of the fates worse than death, which is not belonging, which is not being connected, to have no knowledge of flourishing joy and cherished connection. And to know the things that are more powerful than death, which is our corporate longing that we be one. So, anyway, being grounded is knowing the thing that nobody can touch. And that renders death such a punk.
First of all, I want to say that outtake of breath, which I think all of us are feeling, is also clearly part of the aroma. There's something going on while you're talking that we're all feeling stuff that's hard to put into words, and I want to thank you for that. And then I want to follow that by asking probably another question that actually has a little bit to do with math, since you were bringing up subjects that many of us don't like. As you were talking about Moreno, I was thinking, even tonight, but also in your books, and I'm sure far beyond the books, you seem to be in real deep relationship with thousands of people. And this strikes me as a challenge for most of us, like a math challenge. And I've read about numbers that are the typical number for most of us to have relationships with. It's usually like maybe we can have 150 people in our lives. It's a question about the limits of the sense of kinship or belonging or relationship. How to keep expanding without giving up the depth that seems to be so much a part of these relationships.
Well, I'm grateful that I can text. Because I find that.
So texting.
So I just do it thousands and thousands of texts, and sometimes I do texting roulette. Where I go, shh, and I go, oh, hey, how's the baby? Are you sleeping through the night? Shh, how's that new job? And whatever. I got a text, the other day where. From a gang member I hadn't heard from in a long time, and he said, I heard that you died. So I'm texting to see if it's true. And so I wrote him back, I'm texting from heaven. The cell service is amazing. But just today, you're doing all this stuff, and people are, people want everything. They want you to baptize their kids, and it's sweet. If there's such a thing as microaggressions, well, texting can be micro affirmations. Where you're mindful of somebody, where you're saying, yeah, and you send them. I do kind of a meme ministry, where you send out crazy, every day I send out, there's several, hundreds. So I picked the crazy meme for the day that I'm going to, how are you doing? I'm good. And there was some guy golfing and he falls into the water. That was what I had today, I don't even golf. But so, you want to, because people just, all people want is for you to notice. And so in my own kind of spirituality, you notice the notice of God, and then you become the notice of God in the world. And so you're always noticing. The great poet Mary Oliver, who died at 83, and before she died, she kind of did this accounting. These are the 3 things I've learned in my 83 years of living. And she was wonderful. I love her poetry, and I've heard her a couple times in concert or where she does readings, But she was kind of a little bit cantankerous, there are the 3 things I've learned. Pay attention. Be astonished. Share your astonishment. And I think that's pretty good, But in the end, what's the delivery system of hope? Loving, caring adults who pay attention. So the more you can pay attention, but it's always propelling you out of yourself. I don't believe there's such a thing as, I don't really do sin, I don't do evil, I just don't do that stuff. I think it's unsophisticated. And I don't even believe that people are selfish. I just believe that there are 2 things that keep us quite miserable, and that's our self-absorption, and then a kind of a notch above that is our self-assertion. And because we're always worried about me, what's going to happen to me, I don't know what's going to happen to me today, that will keep you stuck. But the texting kind of thing, because you're not there all the time with 1,000 people, but you can be actually, where you're just saying, thinking of you. Hey, like I was there in my office Monday. I can't tell you, and I really mean these things, It made my whole day to see you, or to wave it as you walk past my office. Like, I'm not sure he knew that I noticed that he was staring at me, And then I recall that, and I go, that was so good, just to wave at you. This big old bad gang member who spent 30 years in prison. So, so I don't know. So you want to be able to, it's the antidote that just pulls you out of yourself, because that's our default setting, which is self-absorption. But the thing that pulls you out is just to kind of have it be a part of your practice, where you're going to text somebody. And everybody has that kind of I have that out-of-body experience where a homie will, I'm just thinking about you. We're human beings. It just does something to us to have that level of connection. But to be so anchored in that as an intentionality, as St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about a modo de proceder, how to proceed in your life. So you want to be freshly grounded in that, where you're just saying, how can I be other-centered? Because I was reading a Tibetan kind of saying that said, wherever you have received the most love, that is your home. And I kind of went, I'm not so sure, because then you're not going to be there in that place. And then you have only one option, which is homesickness. And I just don't think that's true, because in the end, it's never about receiving love. And then once you discover that loving is your home, then you will never be homesick. And it's another way of finding the thing that nobody can touch. Because I can be in Portland, far away from home, and you can still, just let love live through you. But I could be wrong.
Thank you. That's what we needed. Clearly, laughter is also part of the aroma. That it is so clear that talking about so much serious sadness and difficulty and being able to mingle it closely with hilarious Jesuits and other sources of laughter. While you were talking about Mary Oliver, it reminded me that reading you, I kept thinking about an older poet, and it's related to how you closed that last comment about love. And the older poet is Walt Whitman, who he wasn't just a poet. In the Civil War, he was ministering to injured and dying soldiers. So I'm going to ask you a question about yourself right now, and with special apologies because you just talked about, in a way, the problem of self-assertion. But Whitman was able not only to be bedside and to be thoroughly present with people who were suffering the worst that society had to offer, and to be writing letters to and receiving donations from wealthy Bostonians. He was doing some powerful mediating between very different groups of people. And it feels to me like you're doing some very powerful mediating between people whose circumstances might at least be different. So I want to ask you a little bit about whether that's something you think about, whether you have to show up differently.
Yeah, this is a little bit like burnout. I'm kind of, I don't really even believe in conflict. Only because I've worked with gang members for 40 years. And there's gang violence, but there's no conflict. I mean, the violence is not about anything. It's not about conflict. It's not where you can sit people down and say, now let's work our differences out. You want to return to your homeland and you want to practice your religion. No, it's not about anything. It's about a lethal absence of hope. Okay, so then you get rid of the notion of conflict and you say, oh, well, let's address what this is really about. So how do we infuse hope to folks for whom hope is foreign? And how do we help heal trauma? And how do we deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way? There's no conflict in here, And that was my discovery, where that it was never about, getting this gang to sit down with this gang. I did all that stuff. I did shuttle diplomacy. I did ceasefires. I had all these Pyrrhic victories, of let's agree for this summer not to shoot into each other's houses. That I did all that. I would get them to meet together, which was, I never did that again, Then I would have them agree separately to a kind of a thing, and I'd get them to sign stuff. But it was never about conflict. So that's why that's kind of where I go on something like that, because it's never about let's work this out. All of them are indicators of something else. So the homies are good at this. They always say, find the thorn underneath, which I think is brilliant, because we will have people lash out and they'll fight. And the homies aren't tripped up by behavior. They kind of go, what language is this behavior speaking? And so it's not, let me have you guys work this out, you two who just fought. But, this guy's mom just died, and he's bereft. And, and this guy just got kicked out of his house by his lady. So, everything's about something else. David Brooks was writing, it's probably in his book, but I think it was in an Atlantic article where he was saying, the New York Times columnist. And so he says, why are people so mean and sad? And I remember reading that sentence in the United States, he was saying, and I thought, those aren't things. They point to things, They're indicators. So you don't want to address meanness and sadness because that's like alleviating the cough. No, I want to cure the lung cancer. The cough is indicating the lung cancer. So, I don't know. I think that's an important thing. There's a great book out there called The Cruelty is the Point by Adam Serwer, who's a journalist, and it's brilliant, and I recommend it. But the cruelty isn't the point, ever. The cruelty points. It points beyond itself to undergirding kinds of things that really do need our attention and our addressing. But when you say things like the cruelty is the point, it's like saying sin or evil. It ends conversation. And then all we're left with is denunciation and fist waving. Yeah, I'm not that interested. Because I think the cruelty points. It's not the point. It points to something that needs our care. And Ram Dass talks about we're all just walking each other home. Well, we are. We're walking each other home to wholeness and wellness. And homies have taught me that because they clearly and quickly get to a place where they wish they're well-wishers. They wish well of their enemies, of guys they used to shoot at. It's incredible. So, I don't know. I think it's a kind of a more aerial view, and we get to this place where we forget that just about everything is about something else. So find the something else. I try to imagine 40 years ago if I hunkered down in the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the world was my parish. And I quickly realized this is not about conflict. This is about a lethal absence of hope. And once you know that, then if you're infusing hope, watch what happens to the violence. It disappears because you're really addressing what the thing is about. And that's why we initially anyway, we had a school, and then we had a jobs program, and then we couldn't find enough felony-friendly people, and so we, invented businesses. And so now, we're quite large, but we're always, then we were job-centric probably for our first 15 years. And then we stopped, and we said, no, that's kind of not working. And then we moved totally to healing-centered. And the principle being that, an educated gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an employed one may or may not. But then it became our absolute contention that a healed gang member will not reoffend, period. And so for 20 years probably we've embraced that, and we haven't wavered from it. Is there some alarm that's gone off somewhere?
There is some whirring happening.
Yeah.
It's not just in your head.
Yeah, I thought, oh yeah.
There may be another
there's
one.
There's that whirring again in my head.
I have one more question, and I want to telegraph that we're going to be inviting you to ask questions over here in just a minute. So If you've got stuff that you're thinking about asking, please start thinking courageously about stepping up here to ask that. Healing and wholeness is what it seemed like you were talking about. And those are big, ambitious words. And hope also. And last few years, probably tough on the idea of wholeness. We hear a lot about divides. Healing seems like a kind of wholeness. We seem to talk about ourselves as broken. How to say these big words reflective of really large ambitions and have people come along. What do you see there that make healing and wholeness approachable, maybe especially in a moment like this?
Well, that's why I think it's so important to believe firmly that everybody's unshakably good and that we belong to each other. Because once you begin there, then you can roll up your sleeves. And then you can go, then there is no us and them, there's just us. Because the problem comes when we demonize and otherize and dehumanize. And then that's the end of the discussion. I mean, I don't know how you get out of that. But if that's impossible, because everybody's unshakably good and we belong to each other, then you go, well, how can you say that everybody's unshakably good? What about this guy and this guy and this person and they did this? And then you go, yeah, again, I know this from gang members, I've never met an evil person. And then people might go, wow, but you've worked with gang members for 40 years. People who killed other people and who were violent or whatever. But it's like, yeah, but early on, I kind of, that became so clear to me, that damaged people will damage people. So, okay, let's try to heal the damaged. And then that becomes, then you see the precious, soulful core of the other person, and then pretty soon there is no other. That's kind of an impossible concept. That I am you and you are me, and you are the other me, and I am the other you, and it's kind of. But a lot of it has, I always think of Jesus who saw this guy having seizures, and he and the whole crowd thinks he's a demon. So he literally demonizes the guy. But he has epilepsy. That's kind of, for me, that's this model of something, where you kind of go, yeah, here's a pill. But that's what we do. End of discussion. Demon. The other side. The people who vote that way. But the minute you kind of force yourself to say unshakably good, like the Buddhists will say essential goodness, basic goodness. I don't like that too much, only because there's too much wiggle room. It kind of hedges your bets. Well, he's basically good, And that's why I say unshakable, because, you begin at a place. Now, so Homie was in my office not long ago. Joseph, gang member, heroin addict. His father died of an overdose. He's almost 3 times died of a heroin overdose. He's doing well now, but we're having a conversation. I've known him for 40 years, when he was 10, and been to prison. But anyway, we finished the conversation. He stands and he says, I think life is just removing the blindfold. I said, I think you're right. What do you see when the blindfold falls? And he thinks for a second. He puts his hand right here and he goes, goodness. Well, yes, that's the whole thing. But sometimes you can't see it because, you're a malignant narcissist and a sociopath. I just invented that one out of my head right now. still unshakably good, but you can't see the goodness. And so part of the idea of cherishing people is pretty soon in doses that come from every person. It's not just one person. And then pretty soon they go, when you say to somebody, you're the best, yeah, I'm starting to believe it. And that's what happens. And that, that mental anguish is real. And so it's hard for people to move in the direction of wholeness and health and well-being. But that's why we're all called to be whole makers, not to heal people, because healing happens in a community. I don't heal. I've never healed anybody. I've never transformed a life. But I know that transformation happens there because it's a community that has room for everybody. And so Homeboy, wants to be the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in. So it does what it does, but it also it announces something. As the great John Lewis would say, we all live in the same house. He never said one day we might live in the same house. He says we all live in the same house. He doesn't say, well, some people live in the basement, but we still live in the same. No, it's a declarative sentence. And I think that's as it should be.
So why don't we go to the house and invite questions? And while we're doing that, again, please, if you're game, please walk up to that microphone, which is soon going to be lit so that you can see it. While that's happening, can we please say a big, huge thank you to Father Greg?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I guess I just want to say the thing that's had the most impact on me out of all of this is Sharky's story from the whole language, and where he just says, I'm sorry you had to experience that, because that really made it clear to me that you can't save anybody or heal them, but you can say you're sorry you had to experience that. And thank you for Sharky's story. Out of all your stuff, that's stays with me the most.
Oh, thanks. It's funny, I change all the names because my publisher says I have to. So I have like 9 Sharkies in my head. But his name was Sergio, yeah. And thank you.
Thanks for being here. When I was little, you would bring homies over to my parents' house and have pool parties, and it was so fun.
Where?
I'm Mimi's daughter.
Oh my gosh,
LA.
Mimi.
It's really good to see you again.
Gosh, yeah.
Anyway, you had spoken about the technology and scale of wellness and connection and texting, which I loved. How has the digital age from way back when I saw you in the 90s, a lot has changed. How has the digital age impacted harm and lack of belonging at the scale that you see it at the barrio level?
Yeah, first of all, give my love to Mimi. She's one of the great human beings.
Yeah.
I love her. I had lunch with her not that long ago. It's kind of different. I mean, I'm not that good on all this stuff because I'm kind of, again, a geezer. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. I think I may be formally on those things, but I don't know anything about it. Somebody puts me on it, So, but I don't know, there's good and bad in it. I'm the worst on kind of, at the gang level, it's across the country. It's really created all sorts of difficulties. I was in Philadelphia not that long ago, and they go out of their way to say we don't have gangs here. I go, I don't know, walks like a dog, talks like a dog. I think it's a gang, but But they'll say we have corners and we have neighborhoods. It's the same thing, but whatever, because they're very quick to do that. And yet, they do this whole kind of, we're in your neighborhood, and they send an Instagram thing, a picture of them on some incursion into their neighborhood. And then it ignites it. So 40 years ago, when I was working with gang members, people would go into a neighborhood and write on a wall and run out, and now they're doing it via social media. And so it's really heightened an ability to be provocative. But, there's always the ways of being in contact with people, I find, quite good. I don't know what we did before it, a little bit, so thank you.
I'm much shorter than the mic.
Yes.
So I'll have to tippy toe.
That's okay.
I'm very happy to have been invited from one of our community agencies that helps and work with our youth who are juvenile justice involved. Some of the things that you mentioned today that really stuck with me, I grew up in Compton, California, so definitely very aware of the impact of gang violence, drug violence, the non-belonging. And so some of the things that stood out with me that you mentioned is that often the youth or people involved are mentioning, I'm used to being watched and not being seen. When it becomes about you, your focus becomes on fixing. And I think in our systems, I work with kids who are in a system that's watching and often fails to see. So I think the questions for me is when we talk about belonging, how do we impact systems and understanding how to make connections with youth, seeing past behaviors, and how can they reach the cherish part?
These are the best questions I've ever gotten in a forum like this, so thank you. Seriously. So systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And I just think it's kind of, otherwise we get into this kind of spinning of our wheels and, oh my God, and systems will never change. I go, I don't know. What can you do? You can cherish people. Now, I think that has an eventual impact? Of course it does. It's the way things have ever changed. I look back at Homeboy's history. Our first 10 years were death threats, bomb threats, hate mail, total hostility, never from gang members, but from people who demonize gang members. And so that was constant, and I remember being in my office and there was a homegirl, Lisa. She was 16 years old, right out of probation camp, tough cookie from the projects, gang member, and she answers the phone, Homeboy Industries, how may I help you? Bring that bomb over here, motherfucker. Yes, that's right. 1848 East 1st Street. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, Lisa, what is that? Oh, it's some fool who wants to blow the place up, And I said, well, how about God bless you and have a nice day? She's giving MapQuest to the mad bomber. But that is so hard to retrieve at this point because we get none of that now. And I think, if people say things haven't changed, it's just because you haven't paid attention. Of course things are changing. Things are always changing. And that the thing that always impacts that kind of change that we want is cherishing love, I think. Always has. But you stay at it. But it's not for people who want to have the systems change tomorrow. At the same time, and it's simultaneous to this, is that you want to always galvanize your imaginations. Is it okay to imagine the day when policing is obsolete and prisons are empty? Of course it is. If you start to say, well, that's impossible. No. Because once you can start to see it, oh, I know, I see what this is. You know, the largest mental institution on the planet Earth is LA County Jail. Well, what does that tell you? You know, is that we're punishing wound. And we could decide not to. And so, but if we wait for systems to change, you're going to be waiting a long time. But if you're part of a movement, a fresh revolution, an insurrection of kindness that knows, as George Saunders says, that kindness is the only non-delusional response to everything, then you can start to move, and you're part of this revolution. You're not waiting for some guy who's in charge of the system to reverse it. You know, we are. And so this is a kind of a fresh revolution. Even as Adam mentioned, you know, the kind of response, you know, there's a kind of a visceral response to a longing that we could, you know, really imagine something different. So let's go ahead and do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Greg.
Hi.
So my question is about the youth, and you mentioned you worked with kids who have been in jail, prison time, and gang affiliated. I was wondering, even in today's society, what are some tips that we could better connect our youth today who have been, in a gang life, juvenile detention, etc.?
Yeah, it's good. Again, excellent question. You know, we're decidedly, Homeboy, an intervention program in as much as to come into it. So it's called Homeboy Industries because nobody would have ever thought 40 years ago to call it Homeboy, Homegirl, because it was a guy thing. It was 95% of all gang members of the 120,000 in LA County are male. Back then, it was 5% female. Today, it's like 3% female. So we had to change who we were a little bit. All the guys are gang members who work in our 18-month program. But the women have to be felons. Because if we said you have to be a gang member to work here or to be part of our program, we wouldn't have any women. So that's kind of how we adjusted the thing. But we're an intervention program, which is to say 14 years to 75. And so, but there's a kind of the kids who have not yet found their way in the system and are not in justice involved at all. And how do you prevent? And that's loving, caring adults who pay attention. And that's, the delivery system of hope, and who can do that? I don't think we've come to disqualify ourselves because we think it's a rarefied thing. But if you're the proud owner of a pulse, then you can be a loving, caring adult who pays attention. And so we have like 300 volunteers, folks who come and tutor and hang out, or doctors who remove tattoos, or therapists, But it's mainly people who just want a company. And, if it's about giving advice, then maybe you only have people who have been there. But if it's about listening, who can't listen? Who can't be reached by people? Who can't receive and allow their hearts to be altered by people? So keep doing what you're doing, because it's a valuable thing. Because once you know that kids who gravitate, no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's fleeing something. So address what he's fleeing. And gangs are the places where kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery. And misery loves company. So address the misery. But it's not about kids making bad choices. Or it's certainly not about good kids or bad kids. It's about our kids.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Enrique.
My name is Enrique Bautista. I'm a co-founder of TAG, the Taking Accountability Group, and I recently got out of prison after 21 years. I've been out for 7 months. So I have 1,000 questions right now, but I'm just gonna ask a quick one. And I'm gonna take this as an opportunity to address everyone here tonight. So I have experience in the gang lifestyle, street lifestyle, and prison lifestyle. Like I said, I just did 21 years of my life. I was 18, I'm 40, believe it or not. You have experience in everything that you do. I admire you for what you do, who you are. And being here tonight was kind of something that I wanted to do a long time ago when I was still incarcerated and I had not yet found myself. I feel like I'm still searching in many ways. But my question is, what advice would you give someone like me who's trying to make a change in the community? We have a program, it's a 10-week program, and we've been operating since I got out for 7 months. And it keeps growing and growing and growing. How can we get to a level where we can actually affect the community in a major way, kind of like the way you're doing? And the other thing I want to say that everyone here tonight has an opportunity to help in any way you can. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'm doing my part, and I feel like anyone or everyone in here or anybody that can hear this can do their part too. So what's your advice?
Get his card. You know, I keep at it. You know, I was privileged to have a conversation with you before we came out here, and so I hope we'll continue to connect. You know, as you begin to become a 501c3 nonprofit that in your own right and where you grow, is that there's the kind of the tyranny of evidence-based outcomes, and people are going to want you to know, does what you do work? And as much as you can, just, you know, Mother Teresa says we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. And the more you can stay faithful to an approach, to doing the thing that's right and true and just and good, yeah, there will be outcomes. But it's really about the kid who's right in front of you. And you want to stay faithful to that kid. And I just think that's key. Because if success is your engine, then you're only going to work with kids most likely to show success and give you good outcomes. But don't do it. Stay connected with the kid who's right in front of you. And then you're going to be working with kids nobody else wants to work with. And that's good. And people will see it, and they'll know it, and they'll recognize it, and they're going to support you. But success is a thing that can really kill an organization. And you know, there will be outcomes, but you don't want to be outcome obsessed. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Enrique. It looks like we'll probably go with just these last two questions, and then we'll close for the evening.
Hi, Father. I appreciated your kind of alluding to systems change, and that systems change probably we don't strive for system change, we change people. So I am pretty certain that most of the harm that's done in our world, in our city, in our state, is done by people who do it under the legal cover, whether we call them mayors or prosecutors or whatever, whoever has that power to do a lot of things and do it under legal cover. And so I'm wondering if you have stories about like how you've reached people who, they do a lot more harm than I think the kids that spend time in jail or juvenile hall. So wondering if you reach them.
Yeah, again, we're all born. Yep. I did a funeral not that long ago of a woman named Rita Chidas, and she was a kind of a legend in the community, and community organizer and beloved. A funeral so huge we had to have it outside. We couldn't have it in our little church. So I suppose I was anxious about presiding and preaching, which the family had asked me to do. And so I had a dream the night before, and she appears to me in this dream. And she says, all of us are born, and all of us will die. And all we have left is the tender time in between. And so I turned the light on, I put my feet on the floor, I wrote that down. That became the centerpiece of my homily. But all we have left is the tender time in between. And it's kind of all you can do, and I'm again, as I had said earlier, I'm not that interested in reaching people, except to once you find your true self in loving, everything kind of falls into place. This is what I can do. And so, so I've known lots of mayors and elected officials, and so you just kind of want to be mindful of the fact that that's all we have, And in the end, that's the only thing that's changed hearts and minds, and so.
Thanks.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Carlos. I also did 15 years. I'm with TAG. I'm with Enrique tonight. My question for you is, in your experience, is there any books or something like that in your experience you would recommend for guys that are recently out and trying to change their life around, just something to read?
Yeah, I think Always Running. Do you know that book by Luis Rodriguez? He's a poet and a gang member, and I think it's the best book on gangs. But I don't know, people want to, whatever they're drawn to read that, in the Christian tradition, we're in Lent, and so we hear the word repent, and which means literally, like, it comes from pensar also, to think, to move beyond the mind you have. And so we're always being invited to move beyond the mind we have. And so whatever gets us there, I like poetry, I like stuff like that. But the homies, in prison a lot, I remember I was chaplain for a brief moment at Folsom State Prison, and there was a guy, Turi, and he was on the yard, and I go, what are you reading these days? And, well, I'm reading this thing, Brothers Karamazov, and I go, oh my God. But he would just read everything he could get his hands on, which I think is always good, and it's a good way to do time. But it's also a good thing to do while you're out here, is to move beyond the mind you have, because we get stuck. And anyway, I'm proud to know you. All right, Carlos.
So maybe two things by way of closing. First, I want to remind everyone that a week from now, next Wednesday, there will be a follow-up online conversation for anyone that's interested, and you can find more about that both online for people that have been following this that way and out front through Oregon Humanities folks. I also want to let you know that there are other events in this series exploring fear and belonging. In just a few weeks, on April 3rd, Eli Saslow, who lives in Portland and writes for the New York Times, will be talking about poverty, homelessness, and substance abuse, looking at Portland and other cities and thinking again about, I think, wholeness and healing, but also how to cover these kinds of stories in national publications. And then in May, we'll run an event out in Eastern Oregon, which will be accessible online, about animals and plants and fear and belonging. Thinking about wolves and horses and invasive species and how that affects human relationships. So lots of opportunities to keep connecting with each other. That was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is I want to again say a big thanks to all of you, both in the room and online, for being here. And I just want to say a huge thanks, Father Greg, for the way you have helped us move our minds and move our hearts. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you.